What's up guys, Intelitech Studios here, and today we'll be doing the full review of the Dyson DC15 The Ball All Floors Bagless Upright Vacuum Cleaner. Now this is Dyson's first ever ball vacuum cleaner, and as you can see, it's definitely a bulky piece of kit. It is well, it was released in 2005, basically alongside the Dyson DC14, which as you can see I have over here. It was released 1 year afterwards, as the 14 was released in 04, the 15 was released in 05, and both of these actually are I should say all three of these, are actually examples of ones from 04 and 05. So that is definitely nice how we have a very early example of the DC15. Other than this horrible thing, which I'll get to later, this is, well, it's alright. There's not much I can really say that's, revolutionary as far as, that no one else doesn't already know about the DC15. It was the first Dyson ball upright, the first Dyson vacuum with swivel steering, but it also was very bulky, it was very heavy, it had a lot of mechanical issues, parts broke on it very frequently, and it was quickly replaced by the DC25 and to an extent the DC18 as well, even though people argue the DC18 wasn't a true ball and it had its own issues as well. The DC15 was the first one in the lineup, and this particular machine, being 15 years old, seems pretty appropriate to do a review on it. Now, I acquired this machine from a friend of mine had a basically people they knew who worked at a car mechanic shop, and they had this sitting there. It was completely filthy, covered in dust, and at the time the brush roll wasn't working right. So I assumed the brush roll motor was going dead. I offered them $10 for it, and they took it. So I took it home. Obviously, it was in a vacuum save video, and it kind of sat for a long time until I finally got around to cleaning it up and doing some work on the brush roll. Now, the brush roll is still a little bit finicky, so before I actually pack this up and ship it, or sell it to someone, I will be oiling those sleeve bearings so that way they can hopefully run a little bit smoother. As you know, they don't sound the best since it's currently kind of like metal on metal contact, but otherwise it runs very, very well. As you can see, this is the sort of style of brush roll where it has these little things that you turn, and they're actually, up on the top. They're not underneath like they are on the 14. So if I remember which direction to turn these in, I can pull this off. It's actually, it's easier to do this side since the hose kind of gets in the way of that side. We can see if we just turn this, and if I actually, yeah, there we go, that's the correct way. Turn it just like that. This pops off, and we can see that the brush comes out with it. Well, it's at least supposed to. Yeah, okay. So when we can see, that's how the brush looks. So it's actually got kind of a weird bearing setup. This kind of slides into the brush roll motor that's right here in the middle. And then, of course, there's a little sleeve bearing on the other side that this little end cap pops into. So we can see that this actually pops into it like that, which apparently doesn't want to go in right. There we go. This sometimes gets kind of put off at a weird angle, so you have to kind of like recenter it to get this back on. And we can see, there we go, just like that. And then we have to slide this back in and kind of like line it up correctly, which is a major pain to do, trying to line this up correctly. And give me 1 sec. So the easiest way to get this brush roll back in is to take the actual brush itself and just kind of wiggle it until it lines up with the slot on the motor, and then put the end cap over that. So that's kind of the easiest way to get this brush roll back in after you service it. So whenever I got it, these were completely plugged up with hair. They were just completely filthy and needed a desperate cleaning. And as you can see, there are still some spots where it doesn't look perfect. You can see there's actually some blue paint on the front of it, which actually isn't all that noticeable in real life, but shows up a lot on the video. And of course we can see the ball itself. There's this lower hose. One thing I like about it is it hasn't split or nothing over the years. It's very, very easy to maintain. You just kind of pop it off on both ends. Much easier to service than the lower hoses on the 14 and 15. However, this entire motor assembly is much worse than dealing with a DC14 or 15, or a DC14 or DC07, because there's actually wires that go from this duct down into the ball, into this spine, and into the brush roll motor. So if you notice the DC18 and above, the brush roll motor is attached to the cleaner head, and this pops off in a separate caddy. I used to think the DC15 worked the same way. It does not. This is all permanently attached. There is no way that I'm aware of to get this off, at least easily. And I did not bother doing that because I didn't want to risk breaking anything. I hadn't worked on a DC15 in quite a very long time. Last time I worked on a DC15 was probably 2009, give or take. So it's been a very long time since I've worked on one of these. So, my memory as far as where everything isn't exactly that fresh, at least before I got a hold of this and actually got to use one. As far as the cleaning performance of this machine, it's pretty all right. It's pretty much on par with many of the other Dysons. I would imagine it's a little bit worse than the DC18 and a little bit worse than the DC25, but about on par with the DC14, DC07, everything of this era, effectively, of the early 2000s Dyson. Suction on it is very good, as expected, because it's root Cyclone technology, just like the DC14. This Cyclone setup is virtually identical to the DC14. In fact, they are interchangeable, but otherwise it does have its own little quirks. Speaking of quirks, it's got this weird U-bend assembly, which only has one latch, so it sometimes is hard to get off because you're not, evenly pulling it off. You have to kind of like wedge it, and you have to be very kind of diligent at pulling this off because a lot of times it will not come off properly. But you can see, there we go, you kind of get lucky with it and you're able to pull it off and of course access any clogs. And in this machine you can see where the changeover valve is. On the 14s and the 07s it's a little bit more hidden. On this it's pretty obvious what it is. You've got this giant pedal back here, which kind of reminds me of a Phantom, how the Phantoms have the big pedals on the back that you can press, and you press that, and you actually have to like lean the machine forward a little bit and then press it, because you're not just pushing a pedal, you're actually pulling the lever away from the machine so it can slide underneath it like that. And then you can also see the changeover valve engage and switch over, and then from that point you can see the lower wheels pop up and you get access to this little duct down here, which this is like the equivalent of the U-bend assembly, and we can see there you have the swivel. Some people who reviewed this have complained that the swiveling motion is very minuscule. I actually disagree. There actually is a pretty decent amount of swivel here, but it is not the best as far as swiveling goes. You can see it kind of pops up. It's not nearly as good as any of the later Dyson ball units. So definitely out of all the swivel neck systems that I've seen, this one, for how complex it looks, it's not the best. It works pretty poorly, but it does still swivel, and it does still, add that bit of maneuverability to it. But I would argue that the DC14 is still the more maneuverable machine in general because of the fact that it's much lighter weight and it's much easier to handle. And overall, it's very well balanced and it's very easy to use. Even if you're not a person who can deal with heavier weight vacuum cleaners, it's still a decent machine to use, and it does not have any sort of major issues with usability like this does. Not only because of the ball mechanism and because of all this complexness, but because of this garbage handle, which again I'll get into in a minute. So again, we see the U-bend assembly right here, and we have the hose, which goes obviously up the spine and into the wand. And we've got dual cord wraps like many sort of, vacuums have. We actually don't just have a single cord wrap, we just have two cord wraps that stick out of either side, and that is how you wrap up the cord. And we can see here is the very fat duct right here. You can see where it's actually colored and turned green. This is actually where the circuit board is that goes from the brush roll motor up to the brush mechanism, like the actual button to turn off the brush roll. So All of those wires from the power and the brush roll motor that are up here, touch controls. This is the first Dyson to have upwards touch controls for the brush roll, as well as have a second motor for the brush roll. This giant duct has a circuit board in here, which means that there is dust that is coming out of the filter escape that goes into here across this board before it goes into the motor intake. That also means that that dust can potentially short out that board, and it also means that because of the way this swivels, that these wires can get torn. Now, different, technicians will tell you about how often they've seen it on particular 15s. This is the only 15 that I've ever gotten. Actually, no. I don't remember the last 15 that I serviced as far as like whether or not this brush roll motor had any issues. It was too long ago. But this one thankfully doesn't have that issue, but keep that in mind if you are buying these secondhand, which you probably are in this day and age. There is going to be some issues with that brush roll motor that you'll have to watch out for, and you'll have to be very careful with it. Especially as time goes on, 15 years old, this plastic ages and it gets to be pretty brittle, especially after it's sat in the sun and discolored like this. But you can see where the wires intake into the motor, and yet where the motor exhausts through this pipe through the HEPA filter. So you can see HEPA filters right there. It's actually part of this housing. You have to actually use some latches to pop off this entire housing. And it's not just like a lid. The filter actually is attached to this, which is really bizarre. And we can see over here the serial date sticker. We can see based on the date, this actually is from October of 2005. So this is a very early example of a DC15. And this one in particular, for a while I thought the DC15s were 12 amps, but they're actually not. They're 10.5 amps. So that's interesting in case you didn't know that. The DC15s are 10.5 amps. And of course here is your sticker advertising that the filter has to be washed every 6 months. Speaking of the filter, here's the Cyclone assembly that has been aforementioned. We can see it advertises the ball, zigzags around furniture to clean with less effort. I don't necessarily agree that it's with less effort, but sure, you can zigzag. And it has the telescope reach from the DC14. You can see DC15 all floors for all floor types. And it has the typical Dyson ad. All other cleaners rely on bags and filters, and it shows blocked pores, but these clog with dust and quickly lose suction. Dyson Cyclones spin dust out of the airflow. With nothing to clog, the Dyson doesn't lose suction. So we can see there's the max line. One interesting thing compared to the 14's Cyclone, which I will grab right here. First off, the button is different. Later 14's got the 15 style button, but you can see this button's kind of designed where you kind of push it at an angle like this, whereas this button is designed where you push it straight on. This method's actually a lot nicer. So obviously Dyson was quick to retrofit the 14's with the other style button design, because this has a tendency to get jammed and, get pushed at a weird angle. So they have fixed that, and they kind of flattened this button out to make it a little bit easier and more straightforward. But comparing the Cyclone assemblies, if you obviously don't pay attention to the color, because obviously this is in all floors, this is a low reach, but pretend they're both yellow. One thing about the 14 is that the 14, the actual Cyclones are colored. The actual shroud, I should say, and cone assembly is colored, whereas on the 15, they're all grayed out to neutral. Why that is, I don't know. I don't necessarily hate it. I don't really care. It looks fine either way, in my opinion. Obviously, the majority of the body is silver, so it still matches. So I guess that's just sort of personal preference. But obviously, if you prefer one, you can just swap the Cyclone assemblies, because as you can see, 14 Cyclone assembly fits on there just fine. Very, very fine. And the 15 Cyclone assembly fits on there just fine. So that's, you can switch it up whichever way you want it, depending on what you prefer, if you happen to have both. Now, another thing that people often miss when reviewing the 14 and the 15 is that the 14, and again, this is a very early 14. Some people have erroneously stated that the 14 has a filter guard. It does not. At least no 14 I've ever had has had filter guards, and I have 2 of these, and they're both original 04 units. Maybe in the UK they had them, and by the time they brought them to the States, they got rid of it. Any UK viewers of this review who have very early 04 14s from the UK, let me know if that's the case or not. Whereas the 15 actually has this little retention clip. Now, keep in mind that the 14 does not have any circuitry in the ductwork, because when they were designing the 14, they weren't completely, crazy after snorting 7 lines of coke. Whereas with the 15, they were. So they actually have to make it to where you can't close this without a filter, because otherwise all that dust gets into the circuitry and into the motor, and that would be very bad. Whereas, with the 14, you can actually close it without a filter. So on the 15, you can't do that. Although you could put a 14 Cyclone on it and then run it without a filter. I don't know why you do that, but you could. And you can see filter goes up top in both of these machines. Now, in the case of the 15, this little latch is sometimes finicky. So if you're going to put a filter in here, I recommend lining up one of these little plastic spiral pieces with the front of it. So that way, whenever you push this down, it actually pushes on that plastic piece. So it's more likely to close. Because sometimes if you put it with this, with this little fluffy side, not fluffy side, but on some filters where this is worn out and softened up, it will just push this down and then it won't actually close it. So I would say be sure to line it up like this with this little plastic housing piece facing towards the front, so you don't have any issues with the closing and you can just close it really quickly. So that's another thing. Also, the 15 doesn't have any option where you could, in theory, put a filter in this bottom carcass, although people constantly say that you can open up this little door and put a filter in it, and that is completely not true. So anyone who has actually worked on these things knows that you can't put a filter in there. And so if you try to say that you can put a filter in here, then either these tabs are broken or you don't know what you're doing. So just putting that out there, since people claim to be experts on fixing these things, yet don't even know how that works. Now, in their defense, though, I, for a while, thought you could put a filter in there as well, until I actually saw these little grooves they put in there to keep you from putting it in there all the way. So that's a perfectly reasonable mistake to make. But yeah, as you can see, there's that. In fact, the DC15 filters usually look like this, and these filters are much superior anyways, because you don't need this little extra piece here that just allows dust to get through. So this is the better filter anyways. So they did improve the filter going from the 14 to the 15. They are interchangeable with each other, however, so if you want to put either filter in either machine, that is perfectly fine, as they can obviously fit and work just fine. Another thing is that they also will hold the same tools. The DC14 tools do actually fit on the DC15 Cyclone assembly. However, they do use different tools. In fact, that's one of my bigger gripes with the 15, is that you can't use the same tools. This fitting is extremely narrow on the 15, on both the hose and on the wand. If you try to take a DC14 attachment and put it on, doesn't exactly work, does it? So that doesn't work. However, if you are missing your DC15 tools, because these tools are extremely expensive and hard to find, and an absolute pain to find, if you have newer Dyson attachments, like from the DC25 or DC33, they fit just fine. They fit and work on both the wand and the hose. So if you want to use a DC15 and you're missing the attachments, it's very easy to find replacements, because the ones from the 25 and the 33 and the newer Dyson light balls and everything, they do work. Obviously, they're not going to be utilizing this clamp, but they do in fact fit on the wand and directly onto the end of the hose. So that is very nice. What is not nice is this garbage handle. Now, viewers from the UK are probably looking at this thinking, the frick is wrong with your handle? It's supposed to be the other way. And that's exactly right. You see how this handle is faced this way? So when you're using it, it's actually facing the correct way so you can actually hold it. Well, Dyson decided, we're going to do that, but we're going to flip it the other way. I'm not kidding. Like, that is how you're supposed to hold it. As if you're vacuuming like this. But the vacuum's the wrong direction. Or I should say the handle's the wrong direction. Because you're supposed to hold it like this. Like with your thumb on the wand cap, presumably, which is missing on this. That's ridiculous. Why is that the case? I don't know why that's the case. That's incredibly stupid and ridiculous. Now, one thing that I haven't thought about is I wonder if this wand cap would actually fit on a 15. I haven't really thought about that. Maybe I can see, would this fit on here? Well, kinda. I mean, it fits, it just doesn't look right. Well, there you go. So, makeshift wand cap. But as you can see, this wand is awful. Also, they reduced the size of the button, so you have to kind of like use just one finger to push the button and, you know, to release the wand. And it's extremely awkward, and it's very not that nice to use. So, the tool experience on the 15, just usability in general on the 15 is not that great. The swivel steering is nice, but honestly, that's my biggest reason for wanting to sell this thing, is this garbage handle, because I hate using this. And again, you have to lean the machine forward a little bit to press this button, and it's always really awkward. You have to like kind of hit it at an angle, because again, you're not pushing the button down, you're pulling half of the button towards you and away from the machine. And you can hear it, like, it doesn't feel great. There we go. So you kind of have to put the entire ball of your foot on it, and then it reclines back. Now, the swivel steering is very nice. It does have a very nice wide range of swivel steering. Some people have said that it doesn't. In my experience, the range of the swivel steering is definitely very nice. However, it's incredibly awkward to use, especially with this garbage handle. Again, I have to keep reiterating how awful this handle is. If it was facing the other way, that'd be just fine, because, you know, you're using it the way you're supposed to use a vacuum. See, at least on the DC17 and the DC18, where the handles are like this, which I don't like as much, at least they're curved upwards, so it's level when you're vacuuming. This is curved the other way. So that means you have to, like, turn your hand like a claw, like this, while you're vacuuming. And it's incredibly, incredibly uncomfortable. And I don't know how they sold this in the US without people complaining about this handle. In the UK, it made sense. In fact, the DC15 has the record for the most number of handle variants. First off, there is the version that's like the 17 and 18 handle, where it's like this, but it's curved upwards, okay? So, and then there's this, and then there's this, but flipped the other way as it should be, which that version is just the 14 handle with an extra piece on it. And then there's another version that's the actual 14 handle, where it's like this, and it doesn't have this extra little buffer piece right here. So yeah, count it. That's 4 different handles for this thing. And this is the worst one, and this happens to be the one that my 15 has, which is frustrating. But nevertheless, not much else to say about it other than all of those issues. It also has a metal base plate, which is odd. Most Dysons don't have metal base plates. And it actually is like a decent quality, like stainless steel base plate. So that is nice, how that little bit of extra durability is there. But honestly, I don't like it because it kind of makes you worried about scratching up your floors. So, you know, that's kind of my thoughts on that. But anyways, I'm going to leave this, weird red wand cap on here for the rest of the video just to screw with people. In fact, let's see. Why don't I just take this? There we go. I'll do that. Just for kicks and giggles. Because I'm selling this 15 afterwards, so I don't want the Cyclone assembly to get dirty again. So I'll put this on this 14 Cyclone assembly. And we'll run it like that. I put the filter in this, right? Yes, I did. So you can see the filter right there. Okay. Yeah, so we're going to run it like that with this weird yellow and red color scheme. So anyways, let's run the Dyson DC15 low floors reach all. So you can see it's surprisingly quiet. It runs very nicely. In fact, I was worried about the brush roll making weird noises, but it actually doesn't make those weird noises anymore. So that is fixed. And I just noticed that there's this tiny little piece of plastic that I didn't even get. So I guess I'll get that real quick. So yeah, that's my review of the Dyson DC15. As far as whether or not I recommend it, well, I mean, it kind of has some annoying quirks, obviously. The repairability is really poor. Look, if you get one for cheap, or obviously if you're a collector, sure, yeah, obviously if you're a collector and you want one, it's a very it's a very interesting machine. It definitely is one where, if you are a collector, this is definitely one you could add to your collection. It's the way it looks, the way it sounds, like it feels like a high-tech machine, or at least what people, thought was high-tech back when Windows XP was still the dominant operating system. So it's definitely a quirky machine. It definitely has its own little quirks. As far as whether or not I'd recommend a normal consumer to buy one, like if they find one nowadays. If you get one for cheap, yeah, but don't spend a lot of money on it, because frankly, if you have any issues with it not working, obviously, spend about as much money as you would spend on an 07 or a 14 or a 33 or whatever, but not much more than that if you're just a normal consumer wanting to use this, because again, if something breaks on it, the repairability on it is really bad. And I know trying to find parts for this nowadays is very bad, because these aren't all that common, especially not nowadays. So trying to get this thing repaired is a whole nother issue, unless it's something simple like a hose or a Cyclone assembly. But or a brush roll. You can still find brush rolls for this thing. But beyond that, even just finding the attachments is a pain. I found a crevice tool on eBay, and they wanted like $30 for it. And it's like, no, I'm not doing that. So, and that also explains why I haven't bought attachments for it, because there was one person who said they were going to buy this, so I listed it, and they're like, well, it doesn't have the attachments, so I don't want it. Which is wonderful, because, when I spend all this time cleaning something up specifically because someone says they want it and they don't buy it, that's, oh, that's just such a great feeling. So yeah, this is for sale on my OfferUp if you want it, or if I guess if you're watching this and you live close to me and you want to buy it locally, sure. But yeah, so this has been for sale for quite a while, and I have been struggling to sell it. So if anyone wants this, let me know. And I don't know how much these things are worth, honestly. So obviously, I usually set my prices a little bit high. So if it's not worth that, I don't know. Let me know. But I'll accept any reasonable offers for this thing, considering it does run perfectly. But again, it has a little bit of discoloration. It's missing the attachments, but besides that, it's in pretty decent condition. So yeah, that's the Dyson DC15 all floors. And yeah, that's the full review. So I greatly prefer my Dyson light bulb to this thing. It's definitely my preferred version out of all the ball models, and especially my DC18 I really like as well. This is easily my least favorite ball model out of all three that I have. And again, people argue whether or not the DC18 is a true ball model since the motor's not in the ball. Whatever. I consider it a ball model, and it's my favorite one. But the DC18, it's a good, or the DC15, it's a good machine, but I prefer the 14 and the 07 personally, so that's just me. And yeah, but again, if you're a collector, it's a great buy, and if you're a normal consumer and you get one for a good price, it's a good buy as well. So anyway, guys, this is Intelitech Studios signing out. I'll see you guys in the next video. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Have a good one. Peace. And let me know in the comments below if you have a DC15 and what you think about it, or if you have any other Dyson or any other vacuum. Let me know. Intelitech Studios signing out. Peace.